Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We are opening up an intelligence briefing of sorts, and we're zeroing in on a massive, rapid shift happening right now on the global stage. We're looking at how advanced, frontier artificial intelligence is completely upending global power dynamics. And honestly, it's happening at a speed that is startling even seasoned diplomats. This isn't some distant future hypothetical. It is happening right now in the halls of government and the boardrooms of the world's most powerful tech companies.
Okay, let's dive into this. A recent statement from Donald Trump explaining the sudden decision to pull the plug on a major executive order regarding artificial intelligence perfectly captures the core tension playing out in Washington right now. On one hand, you have a massive push to deregulate and accelerate the tech industry to make sure the United States maintains its edge over rival nations. But on the other hand, you have growing, really urgent national security concerns demanding oversight. It's the ultimate tightrope walk between superpower competition and domestic safety. To truly understand these stakes, here is our roadmap for today's briefing. 1. The AI cyber threat. 2. Shifting U.S. policy. 3. The U.S.-China AI race. And 4. Middle power risk. Let's start with Section 1, the AI cyber threat. To get why governments are suddenly so incredibly alarmed, we really have to look at the latest generation of this technology. Back in April, the AI company Anthropic trained a new frontier model called Mythos. And according to independent evaluations, Mythos is capable of executing highly sophisticated cyber attacks. We are talking about attacks that literally used to require a room full of top-tier intelligence operatives. Suddenly, the capability of an entire nation-state cyber unit is bundled right into a single AI model. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the stakes are so high for you and your community. If a model like Mythos falls into the hands of organized crime or hostile states like Russia, Iran, or North Korea, the exposure is totally unprecedented. These actors suddenly have the tools to cripple your local hospital for ransom, execute massive heists on the banking industry, or, even disable the electrical grid. It's a level of scale that critical infrastructure providers simply haven't been able to prepare for. Because of these terrifying capabilities, Anthropic actually made a highly unusual move. They decided not to release Mythos to the public at all. Instead, they shared it selectively with a very small group of private companies. The goal here? To use this narrow window of time while they hold the technological lead, to let these companies patch vulnerabilities before the model ever gets a wider release. And you can imagine, this strategy served as a massive, blaring wake-up call to Washington about the dangers of just putting these models out on the open market. Which brings us to Section 2, shifting U.S. AI policy. Those exact cyber capabilities we just talked about triggered a massive internal debate. The White House finds itself sharply divided right now between two competing philosophies. One camp firmly favors a deregulatory approach, basically arguing that accelerating AI adoption is absolutely critical for winning the global tech race. But another camp, heavily spurred by models like Mythos, believes the government absolutely must have a more assertive role. Their argument is pretty straightforward. When a technology can theoretically take down a power grid, the government needs oversight purely for national security. Now, that retracted executive order we mentioned earlier was a direct attempt to bridge this gap. The mechanics of it meant tech companies would be required to give the government weeks or even months of advance notice before releasing a new model. It wouldn't necessarily be an outright veto, but it would buy the government time to assess capabilities and patch infrastructure. While it was slated to be voluntary initially, many in the industry feared it was the beginning of a really heavy-handed licensing process, where the government ends up controlling the open market. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds into the broader international picture, specifically the U.S.-China AI race. As you can probably guess, domestic policy cannot be separated from international competition. Right now, it is primarily a two-horse race. The U.S. holds a narrow lead in advanced frontier models. We're talking maybe only a few months, relying heavily on exclusive access to advanced chips. But China is rapidly closing that gap. They possess massive strategic advantages, including abundant access to the staggering amounts of energy required to train these models, which, by the way, is sometimes enough to power a small city, along with incredibly deep pools of talented researchers. And the reason this race is so incredibly intense is because AI is the ultimate dual-use technology. Yes, obviously, it's going to drive unbelievable civilian economic activity, but it is also a total game changer for the military. Both the U.S. and China are racing to integrate AI into their intelligence operations to accelerate physical targeting cycles, like rapidly locating missile placements. So if heavy domestic regulation slows down the U.S. tech sector, there is a very real, tangible national security cost in this superpower race. Finally, Section 4, Middle Power Vulnerability.
This technological duopoly brings us to a pretty harsh geopolitical reality. When the two largest powers corner the market on arguably the most important technology of our era, where does this leave Europe? Where does it leave India or other middle powers? If the entire future of the global economy is dictated by AI, being left out is simply not an option. Yet catching up? Well, that is incredibly difficult.
So the crucial point is understanding what we call the AI bottleneck. Middle powers can't just easily train their own sovereign models from scratch. Building something like Mythos demands a staggering concentration of resources, massive amounts of cheap energy, deep pools of highly specialized engineering talent, access to those advanced semiconductor chips, and just unprecedented amounts of capital and training data. While there are a few bright spots out there, the harsh reality is that these required inputs are overwhelmingly concentrated in just the US and China. Without the ability to easily lead the race in building their own models, some regions are leaning hard into their regulatory power. As former German Chancellor Angela Merkel recently urged, Europe is continuing along the path of regulating artificial intelligence. This represents a fundamentally different philosophy from Washington and Beijing, often called the Brussels effect. The goal is to set strict rules that global companies absolutely must comply with if they want access to the lucrative European market. Because of this intense bottleneck, middle powers are forced into some really difficult strategic choices. Basically, do you build or do you deal? They can try to build domestic capabilities, or they can leverage unique assets they already have. A really fascinating example of this is the Netherlands. Because the Dutch produce the highly specialized machines required to actually make advanced chips, they have incredible leverage. They can play their trump card, basically trading the US access to their chip-making supply chain in exchange for guaranteed access to the absolute best American AI models. But this brings us full circle, right back to the beginning of our briefing. If you're a middle power relying on American technology, you are left incredibly vulnerable to shifting US regulations. Think about it. If Washington passes a law that dictates who can access these models globally, middle powers could literally be cut off overnight. They would have absolutely no say in a domestic US policy decision that could dictate their entire economic future. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. As advanced AI models inevitably become the foundational infrastructure of the 21st century, how can middle powers possibly secure their technological future when their access relies almost entirely on the shifting political whims of Washington and Beijing? The policy decisions made in just the next few months are going to shape the global balance of power for decades to come. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.